HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Bomb Doctor, a scientist's story of bombers, Beakers, and Bloodhounds, by Kirk Yeager and Celine Yeager, read by Paul Bellantoni. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to photos present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Limit of liability, disclaimer of warranty. The opinions and views expressed are those of the author, and not that of the FBI or any other government agency. Adventures relayed do not constitute an official FBI record of events or investigations. Bad words used and lapses into sarcasm have not been condoned by the United States government, its myriad of fine institutions, or any of its many dedicated employees. This is a work of nonfiction. All people, locations, events, and situations are portrayed to the best of the author's memory and knowledge. Although adequate research was undergone concerning criminal cases, real-life people and perceptions, and authentic situations and incidents, the author and publisher do not assume and hereby disclaim any liability concerning any legal or criminal details present in this book. Introduction. The Way of the Bomb. My sister and her family often visit over the holidays. A few Easters ago, they were greeted by a tall stack of sawed-off bamboo stalks drying on my front porch next to a bucket filled with roughly 4,000 matchsticks that had their heads clipped off and a metal toolbox labeled explosive material, in Sharpie, sitting off to the side. When she inquired about my little project, I assured her it was fine, just something I'd read about in Inspire magazine. Seriously, it was something I'd read about in Inspire, an online magazine published by AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. The magazine is an important brand-building tool for the organization. Like many magazines, it also features recipes, except these aren't for cakes and instant pot stews. These are for bombs. The edition I'd just finished before my sister came to call included an illustrated guide for harvesting explosive fillers for deadly pipe bombs from common matchheads. I thought I'd give it some study. However, the first stage was harvesting explosives from 30,000 matches. After months of cutting off match heads, crushing match heads, grinding match heads, and wondering if my wife would notice if I borrowed her food processor to make a match puree, I was able to determine the sections of the recipe that worked and posed a viable threat. I was also able to see all the little things that did not work so well and would more than likely result in terrorist flambé. I won't be posting these on Pinterest anytime soon. 1. Important note. I'm not recommending, in fact, I'm strenuously discouraging that others read Inspire. Depending upon where you live, it can actually land you in a fair amount of hot water. Britain and Australia have strict anti-terrorism laws that can make it a crime to download its contents. Dozens of people have been arrested and prosecuted in Britain just for downloading Inspire. Terrorists come up with their creative ideas for bombs by doing what many other inventors do. Rather than reinvent the wheel, they steal from history, and from each other, generally taking something used for construction and harnessing it for mass destruction. You can trace the origins back to black powder, which was used in cannons and powder kegs of the 1800s. Then, courtesy of Alfred Nobel, came dynamite, which produced an offshoot of putty-like explosives like gelignite. Dynamite helped us build railways and mine for underground resources to make energy, but it also has the obvious potential for great destruction. Nobel himself would go on to make a fortune selling many of his explosive inventions for military application. But, in an odd twist of fate, before he died, a local newspaper printed his obituary by mistake. In it, they referred to him as the Merchant of Death. He was so shaken by this being his lasting public legacy that he created the now famous Nobel Peace Prize. In a move that would have surely made Nobel proud, in 2017, the Nobel Prize Committee granted that award to the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which are, of course, the most devastating bombs known to man. It used to be harder for would-be bombers to find new ways to wreak their havoc. Word of mouth only spread so far, and books aren't exactly current resources. Today, thanks to outlets like Inspire, novel ways to conjure up explosive devices are just a click away. In the 2000s, we saw a wave of pressure cooker bombs, kitchen appliances packed with shrapnel and detonated by electronic devices, including those planted by convicted bomber Ahmad Rahami in New York City's Chelsea district in the fall of 2016, said by friends to be informed by the likes of Inspire. There is no shortage of angry minds in search of diabolical ways to harness any and every volatile reaction. The FBI Explosives Unit fields countless calls from commercial airlines, government officials, and concerned citizens asking if everyday, seemingly innocuous household goods like toothpaste or mouthwash could be used to explode a car, airplane, or building. People have made explosives out of plenty of chemicals that are used in common consumer goods, including fertilizer, hydrogen peroxide, and paint thinner. Richard Reed, the would-be British shoe bomber, tried unsuccessfully to discharge a plastic explosive he had stuffed into the waffle pattern in the sole of his shoe using a detonator made with one such chemical, triacetone triperoxide, or TATP, during a Paris to Miami flight in 2001. That was the first major terrorist attack against a commercial flight destined for the United States since the Pan Am bombing in 1988, and is the reason we remove our shoes in airports to this day. Several years later, counter-terrorist authorities reported thwarting as many as 10 potential terrorist attacks on London to U.S. flights where would-be bombers planned to mix a volatile solution using one of the chemicals needed to make TATP. This is why you can no longer bring large quantities of liquids through airline security. The forensics my colleagues and I do after the bomb drops is designed to clear the way for preventing future tragedy. When you understand the bomber's materials and motivations, you can foil them before they light their first fuse. The challenge is staying one step ahead of them, being able to see far enough ahead to block their move. It's like a game of chess, only instead of having rooks, queens, bishops, and knights moving predictably side to side and along diagonal lines, someone introduces a flying rhino that can wipe out a whole row. You need to see that coming. To stay one step ahead, I read what the bad guys read, and have spent a good deal of my career manufacturing explosives that replicate the materials deployed by terrorists. My job is to understand what these folks are cooking up, and to help the good guys safely make it go away. It is not always without folly. I need to keep my own ego in check, lest the materials I am working on do the job for me. Early on in my FBI career, I made a training film for bomb techs with an engineer colleague of mine. This gentleman later went on to lead the entire FBI unit that does our forensic bombing investigations. In the film, we were producing a generic explosive device often made by juvenile bombers. It starts out with 2 chemicals placed in a plastic 2-liter soda bottle. You add water to start a chemical reaction which releases gas and slowly pressurizes the bottle. Eventually, enough gas is produced to pop the bottle and, in its most common application, blow up a household mailbox. Knowing how finicky these devices can be, my colleague and I were very cautious in the amount of chemicals we added. Using just the minimal amounts of the materials, we closed the bottle cap and waited. And waited. Eventually, it became obvious to us that we were too timid in our construction. At this point, we should have incrementally increased the amount of material being applied to the task at hand. However, I think we both took the lack of reaction as a professional affront. Neither of us was going to let the top FBI bomb specialists fail at making a bomb a 12-year-old delinquent could produce. In an effort to keep from providing bomb-making instructions to the listener, I will not mention the chemicals used. However, one of them resembles tinsel. In our first device, the bottle had only a small mound of tinsel sitting on its very bottom. By the time we had the second device put together, it looked like someone had crammed a whole Christmas tree into the bottle. I knelt down with a funnel and added water, and then hiss. A very immediate, oh shit moment. For a brief second, I caught my partner's eyes as we simultaneously surmised it would be prudent to de-ass the area. He was standing and able to move faster. Being on one knee, it took me a second longer to backpedal. In this crucial second, the mixture was generating gases so rapidly that the bottle was shaking and frothing. As I stood, it toppled over, its mouth facing me. We never had a chance to put the lid on the bottle top, which left the perfect opening for all the hot water and nasty chemicals to hose me down, as the bottle became a projectile, rocketing over 100 feet into the air. Thankfully, I was wearing safety gear, and we poured water over me to wash away the caustic chemicals, so I did not get too badly injured. But I was reminded of one of the adages passed on to me by the FBI agent who first trained me in the lab. If you are going to run with wolves, make sure you don't trip and fall. I have been lucky enough to only stumble a time or two. Fortunately, though not for them, the bad guys often have 2 left feet. Equipped with just enough knowledge to make them dangerous to themselves, their stumbles frequently result in receiving a hard lesson in shock physics before the bomb makes it to its intended destination. Other times, as in the case of Cesar Sayoc, the bomb thankfully doesn't go off at all. When a caretaker at billionaire George Soros's home went out to get the mail on Monday, October 22, 2018, one of the packages didn't look quite right. It was a taped-up 8x10 envelope that had a bit of heft, not a typical piece of parcel post. The caretaker smartly placed the mystery package in a stand of trees away from the house before summoning law enforcement. Upon tearing it open, the authorities reportedly found an unwelcome gift nestled inside the bubble-wrap interior, a 6-inch pipe along with a battery, wiring, a small clock, and a black powder. A bomb. The original weapon of choice among the Davids of the world who want to bring down their perceived Goliaths. It's a theme that has run through bombing campaigns since humans learned to harness the powers of explosive chemical reactions. Lone vigilantes or cells of like-minded angry individuals use high-powered explosives to amplify their stature and take down those they feel are their larger, oppressive enemies. Zeroing in on Cesar Sayoc, the 56-year-old former male dancer and pizza delivery man from Aventura, Florida, proved to be a fairly straightforward forensic affair. For one, he didn't exactly hide his raging animosity as he drove around town in a white stretch van that he'd plastered with giant headshots of public figures like Michael Moore and Hillary Clinton placed in crosshairs. More importantly, his devices, which he sent to the homes of high-profile figures including Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and the Clintons, never blew up in the hands of their recipients. Instead, the FBI was able to recover more than a dozen devices, all intact. That's a veritable gold mine of forensic information. It took very little digging to discern how the devices were constructed, what materials were used, and how they were packaged and postmarked. He essentially left a trail of breadcrumbs leading the feds to his doorstep. According to news reports, Sayoc consistently misspelled the names of some of his targets. He misspelled Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz's S-C-H-U-L-T-Z last name as S-H-U-L-T-Z on both the package containing her pipe bomb and in Twitter rants from an account believed to be his. Similarly, he'd misspelled Hillary, H-I-L-L-A-R-Y, as H-I-L-A-R-Y in his social media diatribes and on the pipe bomb sent to her. A DNA sample found inside a package sent to Obama matched Sayoc. He'd also left behind a fingerprint on the envelope mailed to Democratic Representative Maxine Waters of California that matched samples taken from Sayoc during a previous arrest. It was a relatively easy case. Classic CSI? Really? 2. Sayok eventually pleaded guilty to mailing 16 improvised explosive devices to victims across the country. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. According to news reports, he blamed his behavior on mental illness and excessive use of steroids. He also claimed that though the devices looked like bombs, he did not intend for them to explode. In reality, it's rarely ever classic CSI. Why? Because bombs often blow up, and when they do, we're not left with neat packaging riddled with easy-to-inspect evidence. The forensic work required to solve the mystery of a crime involving high explosives is like nothing you've ever seen on a made-for-television investigative series. Forget about fingerprint evidence, that's blown to smithereens. There is rarely DNA of any value. As a true bomb detective, what you have to work with are fragments, soot, fields of twisted metal, and charred human remains. You have carnage and chaos. And in that sea of wailing sirens, beeping horns, screaming survivors, and the stench of diesel fuel and decaying bodies, your job is to ferret out forensic clues in a type of macabre scavenger hunt. Your mission is to find what you need to reconstruct the crime, recreate the explosive device or devices, and determine what the bomb looked like and what went down before it was all torn asunder, in the hopes of ultimately bringing the bad guys to justice and preventing further attacks. That's what true bomb forensics is like. You're walking into hell blindfolded. You don't know what's in front of you. You don't know where the path will lead you. You just start pursuing different avenues, wading through idle speculation and finding forensic clues to slowly develop a fuller picture. This process does not happen overnight. It takes weeks, months, years, even. But it's work we learn from, and work that helps prevent more catastrophes in the world. It's gritty, it's gruesome, it's time-consuming, and sometimes dangerous. And it's 100% worth it. Chapter 1. Mass Destruction for the Masses. During my tenure as a research science and adjunct professor of chemistry at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, before I officially joined the Bureau, I conducted field tests in Socorro for the FBI. We were doing a deep dive into the use of ammonium nitrate, AN, a type of fertilizer mixed with a variety of fuels to make car bombs, which were wreaking havoc in the US and UK at the time. Governments on both sides of the pond were eager to learn more about these materials and find ways of preventing terrorists from using them to create mass mayhem. Over the course of 6 years, my team and I prepared approximately 128,000 pounds of explosives created from fertilizer and a wide assortment of fuels. I cannot recall the number of old junker vehicles I disseminated into the desert during that time frame, but one test shot in particular stands out. During one of our largest tests, meant to simulate a truck bomb, we piled about 4,000 pounds of AN, which had been mixed with diesel fuel to produce an explosive called ANFO, on a testing pad. Everyone else watched the pad through a periscope-like assemblage of mirrors from the blast-proof observation area deep within the bunker. The doorway faced away from the range, so fragmentation was not of concern. It was spring, and I was enjoying the cool mountain desert air. I was wearing a ball cap, and the technician next to me had on a wide-brimmed straw cowboy hat. I remember hearing the countdown. 3, 2, 1... A peculiar moment of stillness accompanied a huge fireball and blast, as if captured on a reel of a silent film. As the shock wave eventually reached out and touched me, as if two huge hands had thumped me from the front and back simultaneously, my ball cap snapped from the brim, facing forward, to standing straight up at attention, much like Daffy Duck's beak after being shot in the face. My colleague's cowboy hat blew off his head and sailed 20 feet into the far corner of the bunker. But witnessing the forces of a large-scale explosion in a controlled field test is far different than the horror the world had recently witnessed on the streets of Oklahoma City, when massive amounts of this type of explosive found themselves in the wrong hands. It had been an otherwise normal, clear, sunny day in Oklahoma City when Timothy McVeigh drove a truck laden with approximately 2 tons of fertilizer-based explosives and detonated it outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. Within a fraction of a second, a wall of superheated pressurized gases smashed into the building and shattered its facade. This wall of pressure pushed upwards against the floors, lifting them against gravity, a direction architects and engineers never planned for or designed against. As the blast wave swept by, the floors relaxed, only now the structural supports holding the floors up against the pull of gravity were no longer there. They'd been pulled apart by the upward force of the blast and could no longer bear the weight when the floors settled back down. As the floors collapsed, they created a massive gaping hole in the building, which is the image we're so familiar with today. Ultimately, the blast leveled 1/3 of the 9-story concrete building, as well as damaged 324 buildings within a 16-block radius. It killed 168 people, including 15 children in Murray's daycare center. McVeigh, a Gulf War veteran enraged over the handling of the Waco siege, wanted to inspire a riot against what he saw as a tyrannical federal government. He defended the bombing as a legitimate act. That is what bombers do. It's what they have always done, though the present has a way of forgetting the past. We tend to think of terrible acts as being unique to the here and now, a sign of deteriorating times. It's part of human nature to romanticize a simpler, better past. But Timothy McVeigh was not the first U.S. bomber to make his seething rage against the government known through the most macabre of means. He was also not the first to include children in his body count. In 1927, Andrew Kehoe conducted a multi-prong attack against a schoolhouse and its administrators in Bath, Michigan. Over a period of months in the spring of 27, Kehoe used his position as a trusted handyman to pack crawl spaces in the newly constructed Bath Consolidated Schoolhouse with hundreds of pounds of dynamite and the explosive pyritol. The night before the attack, Kehoe killed his wife and rigged all the buildings on his farmstead with incendiary devices. At 8:45 on the morning of May 18th, the last day of school for that year, timed detonators initiated the charges underneath the north wing of the 3-story schoolhouse. The resulting explosion collapsed the structure and killed 38 elementary school children and 6 adults. Only part of the attack worked to plan. Half of Kehoe's charge failed to initiate. The police later recovered over 500 pounds of explosives with the assistance of a 14-year-old boy small enough to fit into the crawl spaces where they were secreted. In a final act of savagery, Kehoe packed his car with all the heavy metal tools from his barn and a few remaining cases of dynamite. He set off the incendiary devices in all his buildings and then drove off to the smoldering remains of the school. Fire trucks responding to the massive fire on his property passed Kehoe as he drove to his final destination. When he got to the school, Kehoe called the superintendent, who was helping pull bodies from the wreckage, over to his car. He reached over and pulled out a rifle, with which he shot into the cases of dynamite. The explosion killed him and the superintendent. Thus, he became the first suicide car bomber in the U.S., as well as the first to target children. Kehoe's attack was the most deadly bombing in U.S. history at the time. It would remain so until Oklahoma City. Reasonable people try to understand the root of such evil. They ask, why? Like McVeigh, Kehoe felt wronged by the government, in this case for increasing taxes on his farm and denying his bid for township clerk. When disturbed people like Kehoe and McVeigh become incensed over a real or imagined wrong and perceive the perpetrator of this injustice is too strong to take on, they often turn to high explosives as the great equalizer. That is the nature of bombers and their campaigns. At the time of the Oklahoma bombing, I was at a terrorism symposium on the campus of New Mexico Tech. A young postdoctoral researcher learning about explosives, science, and range testing. I had been at Tech for about 16 months. During that time, I had embarked on a career of replicating terrorist explosive recipes and conducting detailed studies on the products they created. Tech was unique in that it contained a research division dedicated to the study of explosives, the Energetic Materials Research and Testing Center, EMRTC. It also contained a cadre of some of the best-known explosive researchers, scientists, and engineers whose playground covered 42 square miles of the New Mexican desert. On the morning of April 19, 1995, I was sitting in Tech's conference center attending EMRTC's Explosive Industry Research Conference. The theme of this particular conference was Terrorist Application of Explosives. Through contacts from past research programs with the FBI, the FAA, and the UK government, we had a star lineup of speakers, all of whom dealt with terrorist attacks at the national level. First up at 8 a.m. was the FBI briefing on the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Just 6 months earlier, I had met the FBI team who investigated the bombing. The team had synthesized a massive amount of urea nitrate years earlier, but were forbidden to test it by the courts while the trial was going on. Once the guilty verdicts came in, the FBI found itself with 1,200 pounds of improvised explosive they really didn't want sitting around, and a strong desire to blow it up. They came out to EMRTC to do just that. Fast forward 6 months to the conference. The agent in charge of the bombing forensics captured the audience's attention with the investigation backstory. A terrorist cell produced half a ton of explosives in an apartment building, assembled a devastating vehicle bomb, complete with dynamite made from toilet paper rolls, ammonium nitrate, and nitroglycerin, drove it into the B2 level of the World Trade Center parking garage, lit a fuse with a 20-minute delay, and then barely got out in time in a getaway car. The agent explained how the bomb created a crater 60 yards across in the interior of the building that punched holes above and below through multiple stories. Out of the massive heap of cars tumbled into the underground crater, investigators pulled the magic piece of the bomb vehicle containing the critical vehicle identification number, VIN number. The VIN number discovery led to a rider rental agency in New Jersey. Agents were informed that the individual who rented the bomb vehicle had attempted multiple times to get his $400 deposit back, claiming the truck had been stolen. The third time he came back, he was provided with more than he bargained for, FBI agents manning the counter. By all accounts, the EMRTC conference was starting off with great potential. But at 9:02 a.m., one time zone and approximately 600 miles away, a new horror was unraveling, engraving itself into the annals of American history. Shortly before 9 a.m. Oklahoma time on April 19, 1995, just as the FBI speaker was stepping on the stage, Timothy McVeigh was sitting at a stoplight in Oklahoma City. As he waited for the light to turn green, he lit a time fuse with a 2-minute delay. This fuse ran into the bed of his rider rental van, which was packed with multiple 55-gallon drums containing 2 to 3 tons of fertilizer-based explosives. When the light turned green, he drove forward and parked the van in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, got out, and walked away from the scene to his getaway vehicle. And then the van exploded. Some words have their meaning so deeply ingrained in our being that it seems pointless to define them. Even though the concept of an explosion seems so primal and fundamental, few realize the chemistry and physics that combine in a vortex of chaos to create this event. As a scientist, I would explain an explosion as a rapid expansion of matter into a greater volume. As an author, I defer to explosive expert Tenny L. Davis's words from his 1940s textbook.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?